Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Welcome to our adult viewers, welcome to our young and young adult viewers, welcome to the program 30 Lessons from the Life of the Last Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Welcome to episode 24, the Battle of Uhud. Episode 24, the Battle of Uhud. 1 year after the Battle of Badr, the pagans filled with religious hatred, craving revenge, assembled 3,000 men. That's right, 3,000 men, 3 times the size of the army that they had at Uhud. And their intention was to crush the Muslims once and for all. The Prophet ﷺ was made aware of their plans, and he consulted with his companions on how best to respond to the imminent attack. The Prophet initially suggested to his companions that they fortify themselves within Al-Madinah, within the city, and that they only fight if attacked and if the pagans penetrated the city. If they entered the city, then they would fight back. Other than that, they would not fight. That was the Prophet's initial suggestion. And Abdullah ibn Ubay, the leader of the hypocrites, he liked this one. He liked this suggestion because it would make it easy for him and his followers to abstain, to sit this one out. Basically, they could stay in their homes, and if the Muslims were victorious, they could claim that they had participated. And if they were defeated, they could tell the pagans, we didn't lift a finger to help them, and we were with you all along. We were supporting you all along. So that was his plan, Abdullah ibn Ubay and the hypocrites with him. But many of the Prophet's companions, radwanullahi ta'ala alayhim, they insisted that they go out to Uhud and face their enemy and avoid appearing cowardly. And the Prophet ultimately relented. He ultimately agreed with that. And this angered Ibn Ubay. So when the Prophet ﷺ and his army reached the battlefield, and they were close enough that they could see the enemy, Abdullah ibn Ubay and his followers deserted the Muslims. Abdullah ibn Ubay, he claimed that he had done so. I've decided to leave. I've decided to desert you. Because the Prophet, he claimed that he decided to desert the Prophet because the Prophet had humiliated him by not adopting the strategy that he preferred. But in reality, Abdullah ibn Ubay, he deserted the Prophet and the other Muslims to humiliate the Prophet, to weaken the morale of the believers, and to make it easy for the pagans to defeat them. After being betrayed by Ibn Ubay, the Prophet ﷺ set out with the remaining members of his army, about 700 men, toward the Mount of Uhud, where the enemy was encamped. As a part of his strategy, the Prophet placed 50 archers on a mountainside and gave them strict instructions to guard the rear of the Muslim army and to prevent them from being flanked and ultimately surrounded. Despite the heavy odds, 700 men versus 3,000 men, the Battle of Uhud was on the verge of being an even greater victory for the Muslims than the Battle of Badr. The Muslims were defeating this army, which was more than 3 times the size of their army. But the archers disobeyed. They saw the pagans fleeing from the battlefield, and they feared losing their share of the spoils of war. That basically, because they were high up on this mountaintop and they were shooting arrows down at the battlefield, they feared that by the time they joined the collection of the spoils of war, everything would be gone. So they wanted to join as people were collecting the swords and the shields and the armor and the other belongings that had been left behind. They wanted to join in the collection of that so they could get their share. So they left their posts. And when they did that, the cavalry of Quraysh penetrated the pass that they had been They had been blocking. And they called their comrades to return and resume the fight. The Muslims were ultimately encircled by the non-Muslims. And the believers became so bewildered and intermingled with the idolaters that they couldn't recognize who was who. The believers could not tell the people who were in front of them, is this a believer or a non-believer? So the result was chaos. And the believers, ultimately, some of them accidentally killed other believers. The Prophet ﷺ himself was wounded. He had a gash in his face that gushed blood. His tooth was broken, and he had other wounds and bruises from being beaten and pelted with stones. As he wiped the blood from his face and tried to prevent it from striking the ground, he prayed to Allah saying, Allahumma ighfir li qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, forgive my people, for they know not what they do. A rumor was spread that the Prophet had been killed. This news deflated many of the faithful and sapped their will to fight. Some of them actually just stood there and dropped their weapons when they heard this news. But then someone recognized the Prophet and shouted, "The messenger is alive! The messenger is alive!" And this caused the Muslims to rally. After gathering around the Prophet, the Muslims retreated, leaving many of their brethren dead on the hillside. In total, on that day, 70 Muslims were martyred at the Battle of Uhud. What can we learn, brothers and sisters, from what we heard today? Number one, we learn that sins and acts of disobedience have consequences. They have consequences, of course, in the hereafter, but they also have consequences in the herein, in this world. Sometimes, brothers and sisters, as we see in this story, when people are disobedient, that can cause victory to be thwarted, and it can bring about defeat. It can also bring about calamities and afflictions and plagues, like what we're experiencing now with the COVID-19 pandemic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَمَا أَصَابَكُمْ مِن مُصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ. Whatever afflicts you of disasters and calamities and plagues is because of what your hands have sent forward, because of the evil deeds and sins you have committed. And you have to think about this. This is something which is, we have to understand that we cannot minimize sin or think that there is some sin which is harmless. Because think about it. One sin. It was just one sin. Not from all the companions, but just some of the companions committed one sin. And they are the companions, the best of people who were doing a lot of good deeds. In fact, they were engaged in one of the greatest of good deeds, jihad, fi sabilillah. And that one sin caused them to be defeated. The army of the Messenger of Allah to be defeated, and the Messenger of Allah almost himself to be killed. That lets us know that there's no such thing as an innocuous sin, a harmless sin, and that sins have consequences, very grave consequences. So therefore, we should try our very best to avoid sin at all costs. Number two from the lessons is there can be very grave consequences as well, and we may pay a very high price if we allow ourselves to let our covetousness, our desire for the fleeting pleasures of this world to come between us and the fulfillment of our religious obligations. And sometimes what happens is that we want something from this dunya. And in order to get that thing from the dunya, we have to what? Sacrifice the deen. We have to understand that there will be a price to pay if we do that. Number three from the lessons, those who suffer the greatest trials in this world are the prophets. The Prophet of Allah, alayhi salatu wasalam, he hadn't done anything wrong. But he suffered as a result of the disobedience of his followers. His tooth was broken. His face was cut open. And he was beaten and bruised and nearly killed on the day of Uhud. Who suffers more than the prophets? And they suffer for what? For themselves? No, they suffer for our sake. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our prophet and reward him immensely with the greatest reward that any prophet has ever received. Ameen. Number four from the lessons, sometimes bad things can be a blessing in disguise. And this is important too. Sometimes things just don't go our way. And in reality, those bad things that happen are really a blessing in disguise. How do we see this? The hypocrites deserted the Prophet and his companions. And when they deserted them at the time when they most greatly needed their assistance, that revealed to the companions. The Prophet already knew, but it revealed to the companions who the hypocrites really were. They could identify them now because of what? Because of their abandoning them and leaving them in the lurch at the time when they most greatly needed their assistance. So this was actually a blessing in disguise. We also see in here, there's also, I guess you had sub-lesson that's connected to this, and that is that we learn that a friend, a true friend, how do you know if you have a true friend? How do you know if somebody really is your friend? And sometimes we throw this word around a lot. Oh, this is my friend. This non-Muslim guy at my school is my friend. That non-Muslim girl at my school is my friend. Friend. We're throwing the word friend around. How do you know if a person really is your friend? A friend in need is a friend indeed. How do you know if a person's your friend? When you really need them, when you're down in your luck, they're with you. That's when you have a true friend. And you see that the hypocrites were not really the friends of the believers, because when they really needed them, they abandoned them. Another lesson is that another lesson is that a question that commonly comes, or something that people will raise to basically question whether or not the Messenger of Allah was really the Messenger of Allah, is how could he be defeated? How could he lose? How could he go out to the Battle of Uhud and come back defeated, vanquished? How can that happen? The answer is that the messengers have to experience a mixture of trials and a mixture of victory, a mixture of defeat and a mixture of victory. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. This has to happen. Because if every time the messenger fought, he won, every time he wanted to gain something, he gained it, his life was full of success, then there will be many people who would join him and join his cause, not because they really believed, because they wanted to reap the benefits of his success, reap the benefits of his victory, and they didn't want to taste and share the bitterness of his defeats. And so the way that the true followers of the messenger are revealed, and those who really don't follow him are also exposed, is by what? A mixture of winning and losing, victory and defeat. As Allah says, وَمَا أَصَابَكُمْ يَوْمَ الْتَقَى الْجَمَعَانِ فَبِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ وَلِيَعْلَمَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَلِيَعْلَمَ الَّذِينَ نَافَقُوا. Allah, He says, and what afflicted you on the day when the two armies met, the day of Uhud, was by the permission of Allah, and to reveal those who truly believe and to expose the hypocrites. That this has to happen. It's not an indication that the messenger is not truly the messenger. Rather, it is an indication that he really is the messenger, because that has to happen in order for his true followers to be revealed and those who do not really follow him to be exposed. Number 6 from the lessons is we see clearly the mercy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that it encompassed his enemies and was not negated or abandoned by the harm that they caused him. These were people who had injured him, they had broken his tooth, they had beaten him and pelted him with stones, they were trying to kill him. And on that day, when his face was bleeding and he had to keep wiping it just so he could, he could see, the Prophet prayed for those people that had done this to him. Allahumma ghfir li qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, forgive my people, for they know not what they do. And also the Prophet kept wiping his face, and explains in another hadith that the Prophet kept wiping his face. Why? Because if his blood had hit the ground, Allah would have punished them. Allah would have annihilated Quraysh. And the Prophet didn't want that to happen. He wanted them to be forgiven. He wanted them to be guided. Look at the Prophet's mercy. And then think about us. How oftentimes some people do something to us. Sometimes they do it by mistake and they hurt us. They step on our foot by accident. And we will hate them. We will pray against them. We will curse them. And we're not able to find it within ourselves to forgive a minor transgression, when the Prophet ﷺ was nearly killed by his people and he prayed for them. Look at the difference. And the Prophet is our example. He's our role model, and we have to try harder to be like him and be more forgiving and more merciful. And last but not least from the lessons is that it's very important for us to know and to learn, to see from this part of the qissa, part of the seerah, is that restraint is not weakness. It is a good thing to be able to practice restraint. To be a person who you're angry, you're upset, somebody's done something to you, but you don't lash out. You control yourself. You control your anger. The Prophet ﷺ did that on the day of Uhud. After everything that had been done to him, he practiced restraint, and that restraint is actually not weakness, but rather one of the greatest signs and indications of real strength. The Prophet said in the hadith, he said, "Laysa shadidu bil musara'a, innama shadidu man malaka nafsahu indal ghadab." He said the strong person is not the one who can pin his opponent to the mat. He can take somebody and throw him down with a good wrestling move and pin him to the mat. Oh yeah, he's strong. No. He said the truly strong person is the one who can control himself when he is angry. May Allah make us from those who have this quality of controlling themselves when they're angry. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of you, to bless your houses, to bless your spouses, to bless your families, to bless the rest of your evening, to bless your iftar, and to bless the acts of worship that you are doing in these last remaining days of Ramadan. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who listen to the talk and follow the best of it, to make us from those who He teaches beneficial knowledge and who He benefits with that knowledge by making us from those who practice what He teaches us. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.